Welcome to week 10. This is your weekly overview. I want to congratulate you on making it this far and that there's only a few more weeks to go of our program. Not that you go back to what you were eating before, because if you go back to the way you were eating, your diabetes will reoccur. You have to continue after this program is over. You have to continue to watch the carbohydrates that you eat, and what we're going to talk about tonight, the polyunsaturated fats, not the natural occurring ones, the olive oils, the avocados, those are salmon, those are natural occurring polyunsaturated fat, and they are good for you. What I'm talking about tonight is the manufactured polyunsaturated fats. Now, these are the oils that have in our American diets, they replaced saturated fat. And as they replaced the saturated fat in the American diet, guess what happened? Our obesity rate went up, our diabetes type 2 went up to epidemic levels. Alzheimer's became just a serious disease. Do you know if you live to be 85, the chances of you having Alzheimer's are 50%? 50%. That's awful. And there's no good answer in today's world as far as the medications go. But if you take coconut oil, there is some resistance to Alzheimer's disease. Well, guess what coconut oil is? It's saturated fat. Saturated fat is coconut oil, butter, lard, beef tallow. These used to be commonplace in the American diet, and they were all replaced by manufactured fat, not all of them, but almost entirely, by manufactured fats such as corn oil, canola oil, safflower oil. These are not natural occurring polyunsaturated fat. These are manufactured. And as we, as Americans, as we began to eat more and more of them, that's when these diseases became more common in our population. Now, back in the 1911 is when Crisco was invented. So we go back 100 years ago, things like diabetes and obesity were barely heard of. Alzheimer's was not even a factor. It was just barely even diagnosed at that point. And I know that back in the 1900s, what were Americans eating? Well, most of their diet, over 50 to almost 60% of their diet, was saturated fat. Things like butter, lard, beef tallow, beef fat. That's what Americans were eating the most as far as their calories. They ate carbohydrates too, and they ate protein, but most of their calories, over 50% of their calories, came from saturated fat. And they didn't have these diseases. So back in the 1950s, a researcher came out and said, hey, saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease. Even though in his research it was greatly flawed, and essentially what he did is he said, I want to prove that saturated fat causes heart disease, and so he picked the numbers he needed to make his point, but the research was flawed. And in succeeding studies that have studied saturated fat and its effect on heart disease have essentially concluded that there is no connection of saturated fat with heart disease. However, heart disease has grown in our society. Cancer has grown in our society. If you're a man, you have a 50-50 chance of getting cancer. Well, what's the issue? Is inflammation, systemic inflammation inside our bodies. And that's what causes the insulin resistance. That's why you have diabetes type 2. And where does that come from? Well, I'm not saying it is. I'm not a food scientist, but I'm just making the correlation that the more polyunsaturated fats that Americans have eaten and that are eaten throughout the world, as we consume more of them, our diabetes type 2 rate has gone up, our obesity rate has gone up, our cancer rate has gone up, our Alzheimer rate has gone up. All these diseases that inflict our society today have increased along with the increase of polyunsaturated fat. Well, what does this polyunsaturated fat do in our bodies? It's polyunsaturated fats are made up of different, they call them omega molecules. And two of them that humans don't produce, one is omega-6 and the other is omega-3. Now, the omega-3 polyunsaturated fat is very good, and it works in our bodies. It helps to make good cholesterol, and it helps to make the cell membranes just like saturated fat does. But an overabundance or too much of the omega-6 saturated fats block the omega-3s from doing their job. And so it's this omega-6 molecule that attaches to our cells that cause this inflammation in our system when we get too much of it. You see, 100 years ago, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was about 3 or 4 to 1. So you had 6 omega-6 molecules to every 1 omega-3 molecules, and that worked just fine. Well, now in our diet, because we eat so much of this polyunsaturated fat, these manufactured fats, that the ratio is more than 16 molecules to 1, and that causes inflammation, which leads to insulin resistance, and now you're diabetic type 2, and what are you going to do? Well, you have to stay away from the carbohydrates, as we said before, but the other thing you want to stay away from is these polyunsaturated fats. Now, if you eat out, because a lot of people, 50% of Americans eat out for half their meals. So what do you do when you eat out? Well, you have to avoid the deep fat fried foods, the French fries, the onion rings, the breaded chicken. They're full of carbohydrates too, and those are the foods you want to avoid. You can have the meat, you can have the vegetables. Try to avoid the bread though. But it's possible to eat out on this program and to have quite a nice meal. Just avoid those deep fat fried foods. They're all cooked in polyunsaturated fat, manufactured fat. Do you know McDonald's used to cook their French fries in beef fat, beef tallow? And that's how they made a reputation. They had the best French fries, McDonald's did, because they were cooked in beef tallow. And through lawsuits, etc., and polyunsaturated fats being less expensive, McDonald's switched over to polyunsaturated fat, thinking they were doing the best thing. But you'll have to judge for yourself. I can tell you how to make French fries at home. Is get some beef tallow. It's hard to find. You might have to buy it online. And soak your potatoes. Cut your potatoes up into French fries. Soak your potatoes in that white liquid that comes off. That's the starch. And so you've decreased the amount of carbohydrates in that potato. And you pre-cook it for just a little bit, and then you deep fat fry it, and you'll have some of the best French fries you've ever had cooked in beef tallow. They're very, very good. Now, this week, as I said, this week we're going to continue with that intermittent fasting. Try to eat just one main meal a day. If you need to, have a small snack or have an avocado to help you get by to that one main meal. It's not that hard if your body has switched over to burning fat. If your body is still burning carbohydrates as the main fuel source, it's a little bit more difficult to eat just one meal a day because you're so hungry. So you have to convert your body to burning that fat, and you do that by having more fat in your diet. You eat the coffee with butter and coconut oil, eat the avocados. You absolutely stay away from carbohydrates if you can, and you stay away from those polyunsaturated fats. And that's what converts your body to burning ketones or its own fat, which, causes you to lose a little weight. I'm sure if you've been following our program, you're probably down a few pounds from what you were when you started. So if you continue that, just eat that one main meal a day and maybe a snack. Snacks, again, cheese, dried meats, avocados, things like that. Make fine snacks. And or nuts. Nuts are good. Walnuts, peanuts. Have a couple of handfuls of nuts to tide you over, and you'll do fine. So have a good week. Enjoy your food. Don't forget to stay away from those polyunsaturated fats, especially if you're eating out, and stay away from the bread and the other carbohydrates like corn and potatoes. You have a good week. I'm Lynn with HealDiabetes.com, HealDiabetesType2.com.